indicate that the total remittance flow to Jamaica was 2.3 billion US dollars. This translated to about 304.3 billion Jamaican dollars. And it has been growing over the years. What we notice is that, like over the last 10 years, from 2008, for example, remittances has grown by 30.9%. You know, so it's quite significant. To bring out the point on its significance, we sometimes compare it with the value of GDP. So, and recall that GDP is the total value of goods and services produced by an economy during a particular year. When we compare the annual remittance flow to GDP, remittances accounted for approximately 15.8% of GDP. And why this is significant? When we look at the main industries' contribution to GDP, we know that the wholesale and retail trade, repair and installation of machinery, what we call the R trim industry, accounted for 15.5% of GDP. This is the largest single industry. And remittances, recall remittances accounted for 15.8% of GDP.
The second largest.
So remittances is actually contributes more, or as a share of GDP is higher than the largest industry we have in this economy.
That's significant.
Quite
Let's repeat
significant.
those figures. So 15.8% you said for remittances.
Remittances as a share of GDP.
Of a share of GDP.
And the largest single industry we have in
wholesale
Jamaica,
and retail.
Wholesale and retail accounts for 15.5% of GDP.
Wow.
So,
that is significant.
right.
Yes.
And when you look at, say, manufacture, which accounts for 7.5% of GDP, finance and insurance at 8.5% of GDP, tourism at about 6.6% of GDP.
Yeah.
Remittances is really significant.
What are the main sources?
The main, well, in terms of the sources, it largely reflects where our diaspora population resides.
Yes, North America.
So North America, number one, 54.5% of our remittances come from North America. United Kingdom account for 12.9% of our remittance flow, and Canada at 8.9% of total remittances to Jamaica.
That is significant.
Yes.
All
Yes,
right.
yes,
Now,
yes.
in terms of the profile of the households that are receiving these remittances, you can tell us a little bit about that.
All right, I'll just give you a little on that. But what we can say to start off with is that on average, 50.8% of Jamaican households receive remittances. All right, so that's quite significant. One point to note, which I don't think most persons would be aware of this, is that the richest households are most likely to receive remittances relative to the poorest households. Approximately 40% of the poorest, the data we have suggests that approximately 40% of the poorest households receive remittances, where when it compares to the richest households, the figure is 57%. So if you are in a rich household, you are more likely to receive remittances.
That's interesting.
Yes.
One would have thought it would have been
the other way around. Right.
Yes.
But it's not, because as you started off by saying, some of this remittance flow goes into investment and other purposes. But I can drill down a little bit on that. But just let me, in terms of the profile by regions, the KME, 47.5% of households in the KME receive remittances. For other
Kingston and metropolitan
area, certain parts of St. Catherine, yes.
Right.
Other towns, the figure went up to 53.7%. So that would be your non-urban towns, you know, your Ocherios, your Falmouth, etc.
Right.
Rural areas, 51.3% of total households in the rural areas receive remittances. In terms of occupational flows by occupational grouping, you found that remittance to Jamaica, 24% of remittances to Jamaica went to the unemployed.
Yes.
62% went to persons with at least a secondary level education, and 28% went to persons with a tertiary level education. So again, it supports the point that the richer household receive most of the remittances flowing to Jamaica.
Yeah, I'm curious to know, Mr. Stewart, from a planning perspective, why is PIOJ interested in this information?
All right, one of the things that we notice, as you know, we track poverty, the level of poverty through the Jamaica Survey of Living Conditions. And one of the things we notice is that on average, the person receiving a remittance receive approximately 226 US per month, which works out at 28,300 Jamaican dollars on average. Now, if this person was to get this amount monthly, they would receive approximately 340,000 Jamaican dollars per year. Now, when you look at the poverty data, where the poorest deciles, or the deciles which are in poverty, when you look at their consumption levels for deciles 1 and 2, meaning the poorest, they are below the poverty line. Their average consumption per year, it's about 90,000 for decile 1 and 153,000 for decile 2. What that implies is that if you are in decile 1 or 2, the deciles, the quintiles 5, the quintiles which are in poverty, and you receive remittance monthly, that 340,000 per year, that amount of money could increase your consumption so much that you now fall in one of the upper quintiles. So this could actually take you out of poverty. Yes. So it's something that we keep an eye on, we track, in terms of explaining the relative movement in poverty from year to year.
Yes.
Right? And we know in terms of the wider development, we know that remittance also assists in terms of the main uses for remittances. 19% of remittances goes towards paying utility bills. All right. In terms of food, 18% of remittances goes towards food. Education, 14%. Education accounted for 14% of total remittances sent to the country. In terms of housing, your mortgage, etc., that accounted for 9%. Savings and investment accounted for the other 15%. 9 for savings, 6 for investment. Hence the 15% in total. Yes, so it is very significant.
So what about you said 14% for education. What about health?
Nothing
really for health?
It wasn't picked up in the survey.
Yes.
It wasn't picked up as a major category in the survey. But more than likely there was expenditure on health, but it wasn't one of the major components that we have there.
All right, thank you very much for that, Mr. Stewart. Let me turn now to you, Mr. Ramon Davis, Secretary of the Jamaica Remittance Association. Why should migrants maintain an account with a Jamaican financial institution?
All right, so outside of collecting remittances monthly, weekly, or whatever the frequency may be, bank accounts presents tremendous benefits to migrants, especially if the migrant intends to return home. So as Mr. Stewart mentioned how the funds were spent, 15% thereabout accounted for savings and investment. And so if the migrant want to take advantage of the savings and investment products from the bank or by the bank, then an account with the bank would be suited for the migrant to take advantage of those products.
Yes. And then what about, and then I also imagine that by maintaining accounts locally and so on, you also clamp down on issues with respect to money laundering and that kind of situation.
Yes, we do. So the industry, that's one of the challenges we face in the industry: fraud, money laundering, lottery scam, to be more specific. So a lot of focus has been placed on that over the years. A lot of activities by operators have been, we've taken a lot of measures, we've implemented a lot of measures, we've spent quite a large sum to prevent and mitigate these types of frauds.
Now, in relation, I'm glad you spoke about frauds, because in this age, with cybersecurity being what it is and the concerns that people have about sending monies using wireless means, and what concerns do you have there?
I mean, it's reflected on the books of remittance companies and money transfer companies. I mean, among the large cost items for remitters are anti-money laundering, costs towards compliance programs, costs towards technology, which are all intended to improve the remitters infrastructure to prevent fraud and to mitigate against the different fraud types. So it is an important factor for us, and we do a lot of activities. We spend quite a large sum, as alluded to earlier, to prevent these fraud types.
All right, and finally, how easy is it to get direct remittances into investments, such as entrepreneurship, buying property, licensees of financial institutions, financial services commission, such as fund managers, security dealers, insurance services? How easy is it for the remitters to get the monies into those institutions?
There are products that are tailored specifically for these transaction types. Half of the member companies of the Jamaica Money Remittance Association facilitate deposit taking opportunities, and so migrants are able to send funds through some of these institutions and have it credited to specific account or for bill payments or for whatever means. So it's very easy. The migrant or whomever will need to register with the institution, and from there on then they'll be able to make these payments. So it's very easy.
All right, well, we have to leave it there. I want to thank my guest this afternoon, the Secretary of the Jamaica Remittance Association, Mr. Ramon Davis, and the Director, or a Director from the Economic Planning and Research Division of the Planning Institute of Jamaica, Mr. James Stewart. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for sharing this important information.
Thank you for having us. And I'll just take this opportunity of leaving a copy of the National Policy and Plan of Action for International Migration and Development with you.
All right, thank you very much.
Good.
All right, we'll go to the break.
The PIOJ